Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Studies at Charles Darwin University, and welcome to Outrider 40, Rick Rubin and Production through Reduction. This Outrider comes via request from David. Hi, David. And David asked me to do this many months ago. In fact, when the Outrider series started. But it was important, I think, that we presented a whole series of new ideas, innovative ideas about higher degrees, and particularly higher degrees at Charles Darwin University, to get the structures and the protocols in place. And we've done that. And now the incredible diversity of requests I'm receiving are just exciting and brilliant. So keep those requests coming in. Fantastic. But it is clear, and I didn't plan this, to be frank with you, but we've got a new sort of thing that's emerging in Outriders, and that is every time we hit sort of the zero number, 20, 30, 40, we summon a rather astonishing human. And we talk about them and their career and how it can provide an exemplar for what we do in research in higher education. And that's great, I think, because every 10 Outriders, it returns us to the project that we started in this series, to think about those courageous humans who ride and walk and operate at the edge, who test, who transform, who demonstrate courage and are not hugely interested in fitting in and being popular. So therefore, Rick Rubin, I think, is an ideal addition to this remarkable group of people. And the Rick Rubin conversation that we're going to have today has three parts. Firstly, obviously, we start with, the customary biography yawn, but then we move to a focus on this very odd, very strange, very interesting night's move in his career, and that is the publishing of his book, Creativity. And we finish off by saying, why does all of this matter? Why does it matter to citizenship, and why does it matter to how we think about research and how we think about being a researcher? Okay, so this has been a great moment for me because I've got so many research deadlines at the moment. I'm only just about managing, to be honest with you, and I'm reading between 350,000 and 400,000 words of student work a week. As you can see, my eyes are suffering a little bit. So I don't have a lot of time to sort of stretch or think or hope or dream or even sort of blink at the moment. But can I say, focusing with the research on this Outrider has helped me at this quite challenging, difficult moment. Now, like my entire generation, really, Generation X, we all owe Rick Rubin a great deal. Through his career, yes, he has taken unpopular culture, the culture that's been dismissed, marginalised and ridiculed, and he's brought that back into popular culture. He's transformed the history of hip-hop, country and metal, just to name a few unpopular genres. He didn't fit in, he has never fitted in, and he's refused to live his life within the parameters of what is comfortable, what is expected, and what is popular. He's worked that seam between popular and unpopular culture. Very unstable, volatile space, a remarkable space as well. He was born in 1963 in Long Beach, New York, and he became a record producer that simply changed popular music. He formed Def Jam and then American Records and changed popular culture through them. He also, of course, went to the majors for different periods of his career, having leadership roles at Columbia and Warner Brothers as well. But hip-hop would not be hip-hop without him. He produced the Beastie Boys, Run DMC, and he also transformed metal with, of course, producing Metallica and Slayer. Is it legendary? Now, I respect him so much, and for so many reasons. I've always found him very inspirational, even if I've disagreed or not liked. I don't like some of what he's done. That doesn't matter, because I respect him enormously, because he not only discovered new musicians and performers, which is challenging in and of itself. That's a skill set. But I think what's even more emotional for me is he took the formerly popular performers who were down on their luck, and he created a powerful intervention. And he's done this over and over again. Aerosmith, Run DMC, The Cult, of course, Red Hot Chili Peppers, over and over again throughout their career, and the Dixie Chicks. But for me, the most important bits of that bit of his story involve Johnny Cash and Neil Diamond. Yeah. Now, we're going to return to Johnny Cash in a second, but I need to note the rather magnificent object that's accompanying me through the Outrider this week. It is a guitar. It is the Johnny Cash Signature Edition Martin guitar. Johnny Cash means a lot to me. The first music I remember, my father Kevin, who's about to turn 96, the first music I remember was Johnny Cash's Sunday Morning Coming Down. I was tiny, 18 months, 2 years of age, and his music has existed throughout my life and career. I've researched Johnny Cash, I've written on Johnny Cash, This Matters, and for my beautiful husband Jamie Quinton's birthday, which happens to be on Boxing Day, that just happened, I got him the Johnny Cash Signature Martin guitar. And this guitar is also part of the story that I'm telling today. Because you see, Johnny Cash, unbelievably, was dropped from his record company, Mercury, and he'd really lost his way. And it was Rick Rubin's American Recordings that brought the Man in Black back to popular culture. And of course, at this particular time, when his career was renewed, Martin approached him to do this remarkable signature guitar. Rubin's impact, though, also transcends music. He has been listed, for example, in Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, not in music, in the world. And in many ways, he's lived a conventional life. He replicated the narrative of a lot of us. He was in high school bands, in his case, the punk band The Pricks, legendary. And of course, The Pricks performed at CBGB's. And as the tale goes, and this is a bit of a beat up, but as the tale goes, The Pricks appeared at CBGB's and they got thrown off the stage. That's credibility, brilliant. But also, like so many innovative people, he used his time at university really well. And while at New York University, he founded Def Jam Records, and they originally started as a punk label. And then he met, of course, Jazzy J, and started to learn about hip-hop in a really intellectually generous way. He listened and he learned. And of course, the first major release was LL Cool J's I Need a Beat, and this label went on to sign Public Enemy. Wow. So knowing this history, the history of the Beastie Boys starts to make more sense in their movement from punk to hip-hop. But also, of course, we can't go much further without mentioning Run DMC and Aerosmith's Walk This Way. Probably one of the finest, weirdest moments of popular culture, slamming together literally two genres and creating something absolutely extraordinary. So when he moved from Def Jam, he created a new label, Def American, and then became American Recordings. And this was the moment when Johnny Cash's American Recordings emerged. And this is 1994. 5 albums followed, and these albums were delicate. They were intricate. They were a combination of originals, but also covers. And of course, one of those covers included Johnny Cash doing the 9 Inch Nails track, Hurt. That song, won't get upset, that song and that resultant video changed culture, changed our very understanding of ageing and popular culture. But can I say, Rubin had a tendency to produce the last albums of people. Obviously, accidentally, you don't know when people are going to die. But of course, Rubin also produced the last album of Joe Strummer and produced what I think is one of the most remarkable, provocative, complicated, difficult songs ever recorded, and that is a duet between Joe Strummer and Johnny Cash, and that song was Redemption Song. So while Rubin's success with the Red Hot Chili Peppers is going to probably remain his claim to fame, so, you know, when he dies, Rick Rubin, producer of Red Hot Chili Peppers, right, because he did so many albums with them. But for me, it is the work with Cash that's important, but also AC/DC's 1995 album, Ball Breaker, really, really great album. Transformed how AC/DC recorded drums, really interesting. But also, from AC/DC to the 1994 album by Tom Petty, without the Heartbreakers, Wallflowers. Now let me tell you about 1994, because I remember it well. This was the time of post-acid house, techno, experimental electronica. Guitars were nowhere. I don't think I listened to a guitar track for about 5 years. But in the midst of this, Rubin recorded Tom Petty's Wallflowers, an unbelievable, gentle country, alt country perhaps, album, and I recommend it to you. I was listening to it while I was writing the Outrider for you this week, and I particularly recommend the 2020 re-release after Petty's death of Wallflowers and the Rest. Absolutely incredible. Now, there's no doubt, like all really innovative, edgy people, that Rick Rubin's had some failures. Graham Nash of Crosby, Stills, Nash and occasionally Young described his 2012 experience with Rubin as, quote, irritating, end of quote. Well, that's a blessing, because I find Graham Nash pretty, quote unquote, irritating as well. So what is fascinating, though, is from this background, Rick Rubin decided to write and to publish a book. Right? And the book is titled The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and it was published in January 2023. He stated that his intention in the book was to help people think about how to make art. But the project at the end of the book was talking about how to be, not how to make art, how to be. I love that. Now, you'll notice I don't use the word creative or creativity a lot. Use it very rarely. In fact, when I used it in a title of a book, The Creative PhD, I critiqued the word creative in the title throughout the book. And in the old days when I used to teach first years, and I taught first years for 25 years, I always used to do a lecture about lecture 2 on creativity. And I used to spend the entire lecture showing why it is a problematic word. Now, the reason why it's a problematic word, particularly in the research space, is too often really bad researchers, really lazy humans, use creativity to justify what they're doing. And of course, they're being creative, but the bottom line is they actually haven't read enough, right? Their creativity is masking that they haven't actually seen what the rest of the planet is doing. So what happens is arbitrary and subjective nonsense is justified through the word creative. And what it dismisses is rigour, precision, and discipline. One of my most horrific experiences of being a dean, and can I say it's not a dean in my current job, but being a dean in this space, was watching at this particular university how creative writing students were supervised. Once a week, all these creative writing PhD, masters and honours students would all sit in a circle and try to outbid each other about who had the biggest trauma, and oversharing that trauma. So supposedly the oversharing of this trauma was the foundation of research. Yeah, nah. And all of this was justified because these people were being creative. Well, you know what? Give me methodology, epistemology, and ontology any day. And look, I'm always the first person to admit I am not a creative person at all. I am not creative. Yeah, good luck with that. I'm not creative at all. That's your space. Knock yourself out. Because writing comes from discipline, putting the time in, hard work, editing. And really good writing comes from controlling your emotions rather than oversharing them. So I'm pretty anti-creativity as a word that sort of floats around the culture. I'm creative, darling, knock yourself out. And that's probably one of the reasons too that I delayed this request for David. No matter how much I love this book, you know, do I want to be justifying bad behaviour that's actioned around the word creativity? But I do certainly respect Rick Rubin's work on creativity. Look, it is a bit hippie and a bit sort of spirituality man for me as an old goth, but there's some fantastic work there. And I appreciate Rubin's work so much because he doesn't isolate creativity as the work of a few pretentious middle-class people drinking posh wine and oversharing their pretension. He describes creativity as, quote, a fundamental activity of being human, end of quote. Great phrase. He also affirms the value of creativity in everyday life, bringing, quote, something into existence that hadn't existed before, end of quote. Most significantly, and so usefully, I think, for researchers, Rubin argues that creativity doesn't require an audience. It's a, quote, way of being in the world, paying attention to the world around us, sitting in our context and making it meaningful. Gathering information through our senses, looking deeply, listening carefully, interpreting the data that we receive into our bodies. You see, artists don't create an output, it's a way of being. And most importantly, there's a whole section which changed my life really, but there's a whole section in this book on listening. And Rubin talks about why listening matters. Because he argues when we listen, we are present. There is only the now. And we start to live in a different way when we live in the now. It's a saturated vista. Rubin also locates the problems of mediocrity and of laziness and settling. Not putting up with people being frightened or underconfident and therefore allowing mediocrity to proliferate. For researchers, I would argue, this is really a foundational text for us because it allows us to investigate how ontology and methodology are aligned. And there are very few books that do that. He shows that when we listen, we move beyond our limitations. We learn to think and experience and reorganize our sensory experiences of the world. And when we do that, we become prepared to be unpopular, to be relevant, to be resonant. Now, of course, Rick Rubin worked in hip-hop and metal and country music, worked with Run DMC, worked with Johnny Cash, worked with Metallica, worked with the Dixie Chicks. And as Jake Brown has described, Rubin, quote, rejected the comfort and complacency of working in a niche, end of quote. So much of academic life demands that we not only specialise, but sort of hyper-specialise. And we lose that curiosity, that creative spirit of adventure, of making connections between disciplines and ideas that no one's ever considered before. That takes courage. And you may fail. You must be prepared to fail. And when Rubin was asked how he'd been successful for so long, he stated, quote, "My production style involves being in tune with everything. You can't do that by listening to music. Pro wrestling is really important. Movies, you know, everything. You make records, how you live your life." End of quote. Imagine if we taught doctoral students like that. You conduct research as you live your life. Hyper awareness and respect for the context and the environment. Respectful of non-academic cultures. Dismissive of mediocrity. Valuing the courageous and thriving on change. Learning and relearning and relearning. Doing what is best for the work rather than what's popular. Remaining open-minded, remaining curious. But I also really respect Rubin's attitude to criticism. This is really crucial. This changed me as I was doing this research. Quote, "I try to make criticisms in a very, very specific way. The more specific it is, if someone can really understand where you're coming from and what you're suggesting, the more likely it is to help them." End of quote. That changed, like that for me, how I offer feedback to students. I've supervised hundreds of PhD and research master's students, but that has changed me. Because what I now do, from last week, what I now do when I offer feedback to students is I first explain my perspective. So I say, right, I've offered you this feedback. It is coming from here, from this particular perspective, and this is the logic of my argument. Please feel free to disagree with that if you disagree with my premise. So it's actually contextualizing the feedback to open it for scrutiny. Amazing. Think about how doctoral education would transform if feedback was given in that way. Now, I've always argued that academics can and academics should stretch and test themselves every day. We have to be part of an academic culture that reads widely, but also reads wildly. We must write with courage and precision and rigour. But the trouble is, the culture around us is not supporting us to be uncomfortable, to transcend mediocrity. But I've learnt so much about writing in my own life from exploring Rubin's production styles over his life. He's of course known for stripping back sound. He's the anti-George Martin in many ways. Rubin gets rid of the strings, he gets rid of the backup vocalists, and he strips everything back to a voice, guitars and drums. And I do believe, and I'll take you out in the car park and I'll disagree with you on this, but I can't think of anybody else who has recorded drums as effectively as Rubin. So for me, this is also the model, the archetype of great writing. Slice away the adjectives, short sentences, short sentences, short sentences, less is more, less is more. Precise word choice. And I treat words, I treat vocabulary like I've got a jigsaw piece and I'm carefully placing it into the vista. But the other lesson I think we all need to learn from Rick Rubin is to ignore fashion. And you know what? Ignore the opinion of others. We need to understand ourselves and understand what we are doing. We must never pander to an audience, even an audience of other academics. We need to stand in our present and produce high quality work. And we have to show authenticity. We have to show integrity. We mustn't live the narrative of what we think an academic should do, or behave like we think an academic should behave. Now, I know this is tough. I know it's really tough. And I have a fair number of randoms coming up to me every day offering me feedback. Now, in the old days when I was younger, I used to be polite and sort of stand there and sort of nod and then ignore them. But these days, to try and, inverted commas, get through to me, people offer me all sorts of feedback that, because I haven't asked them for feedback, they've got no qualifications to be offering any feedback, they haven't got 1% of the experience I've got, and yet they're deciding to offer me feedback. And often these days, people start the sentence with, "I'd like to offer you feedback." To which I reply, "I'm not interested in your feedback." I get some very interesting responses when I do that, because our whole culture at the moment, part of the neoliberalism really, is about freedom of speech. People have the right to speak. People have the right to offer you feedback. And that's okay. They do. Knock yourself out. But I have the right not to listen. One response to freedom of speech is the freedom to withhold listening cultures. Okay. Remember that people don't have the right to offer you feedback. And remember that Theodore Roosevelt line I quote all the time, quote, "The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena," end of quote. If you ain't in the arena, go do something else. I'm not interested. So it's very important that you centre yourself and you do your best work, and you're not necessarily drawn to the opinions or the views of others. You see, Rubin did that. He took the unpopular, the discarded, the marginalised, the forgotten, and he made it meaningful. Now that seems a pretty good methodology to resurrect the project of international higher education. Beyond the marketing campaigns, the building campaigns, the rebranding structures, the strategic plans, the vision statements, beyond all of that stuff, we can start again. Because Rubin's trademark was production by reduction. And this trope, of course, gave Johnny Cash another career, granting him a late style. If Rubin hadn't believed in Cash, had agreed with Mercury Records, who said he was washed up and his career was over, we would not have these precious songs that changed the world. Cash described the work he did with Rubin as the most creative he had ever been since his time at Sun Records. Yes, with Elvis. That first album with Rubin was composed of demos that were recorded in Rubin's front room. Cash would learn a song one day and record it the next. By producing through reducing, Rick Rubin took unpopular culture. He stripped it bare. He got it right down to the bones of its very unpopularity and then dragged it back into popular culture. For those of us who are researchers, we've got a lot to learn here. We've got a lot to learn about how the edges and the margins, in those spaces, the truths, the difficult truths, are revealed. Yes, those edges are sharp. And yes, those borders around our disciplines are patrolled aggressively. It is frightening and it is disturbing to be an outrider, because all the expectations and assumptions are subverted. When you're an outrider, you're not safe. You're not protected. You are exposed to the elements. But wow, It's quite a view. Ask yourself this week, as you move through your research days, are you fitting in? Are you working really hard to be comfortable and to be popular? Or are you opening yourself to the environment, reducing while you are producing? Are you actively listening in and through our present? They are the lessons from Rick Rubin. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.